Today we're going to explore 5 evidence-backed, actionable strategies to accelerate fat loss, not through gimmicks or quick fixes, but by understanding how the human brain and body actually work. If you're looking for sustainable and efficient fat loss, the key is to leverage your biology. We're not guessing here, we're using mechanisms. So let's get into it. One of the most foundational and powerful, yet often overlooked, tools for accelerating fat loss begins not in the kitchen or the gym, but with your eyes, specifically with how they interact with light. Every cell in your body operates according to a 24-hour rhythm, often referred to as the circadian rhythm. This rhythm governs when you feel alert or sleepy, when hormones like cortisol and melatonin are released, when your digestive system is most active, and even when your body is most likely to tap into stored fat for energy. The primary mechanism by which this internal clock is set or entrained is through light exposure, particularly through light viewed with the eyes early in the day. This is not metaphoric, it is literal, measurable, and supported by decades of chronobiology research. Within your eyes are specialized cells called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. These cells don't help you see objects or colors. Instead, they are wired directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN, of the hypothalamus, which acts as the body's central circadian clock. When these cells detect the particular wavelengths and intensity of natural light found during sunrise or early daylight, they send powerful electrical signals to the SCN. This effectively tells your body it's daytime, time to be alert, to move, and to metabolize energy efficiently. The consequence of this signal is a timed release of cortisol, a hormone commonly misunderstood as merely or stress hormone, but which actually plays a critical role in mobilizing energy substrates, including glucose and fatty acids, to be used for physical and cognitive activity throughout the day. Cortisol released in this way is distinct from stress-induced cortisol. Morning cortisol, properly timed, leads to improved mood, heightened focus, and most relevant to our discussion, enhanced fat metabolism. In addition, light exposure early in the day suppresses melatonin, a hormone associated with sleep and fat storage. Suppressing melatonin in the morning is critical because its continued presence into the daylight hours is associated with grogginess, poor metabolic function, and irregular appetite signaling. When melatonin is cleared early due to light exposure, you not only feel more alert, but your insulin sensitivity improves, meaning your body processes and stores nutrients more effectively and with less tendency to shuttle excess calories into fat storage. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that if your goal is to accelerate fat loss, one of the simplest and most reliable things you can do is to step outside and get natural sunlight into your eyes within 30 to 60 minutes of waking. The light needs to be bright, ideally $10 in lux or more, and not filtered through windows or sunglasses, which dramatically reduce its effectiveness. On a clear morning, this may only require 5 to 10 minutes. On overcast days, or if you're farther from the equator, it may require 20 to 30 minutes. Artificial indoor lighting, even bright overhead LEDs, are not an adequate substitute. They are typically orders of magnitude dimmer and fail to provide the necessary stimulus to the retinal ganglion cells. The reason this matters for fat loss is multifold. First, setting your circadian clock early in the day establishes predictable rhythms for other hormonal systems, including the timing of ghrelin and leptin, 2 hormones that regulate hunger and satiety. Disruption of these rhythms, often caused by insufficient morning light exposure or excessive evening light exposure, has been linked to increased appetite, late-night cravings, and reduced energy expenditure. Second, early light exposure has been shown to increase overall daily energy expenditure. This means that even at rest, your body burns more calories when your circadian rhythm is functioning properly. Finally, individuals who receive regular morning light have been found in clinical studies to have lower body mass indices, BMIs, and reduced visceral fat, even when controlling for sleep duration and diet. This practice is not a biohack or a fringe wellness strategy. It is a core biological necessity that aligns with how our brains and bodies evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. For nearly all of human history, we woke with the sun, moved outdoors, and engaged in physical activity early in the day. Our metabolic machinery expects this pattern. In the modern world, where many people start their day under dim indoor lighting, immediately check phones and remain sedentary for hours, we see a dysregulation of these systems that leads not just to impaired fat loss, but to widespread metabolic dysfunction. Correcting this does not require expensive equipment or elaborate protocols. It requires light, natural light, at the right time and in the right dose. Fasted training, specifically low to moderate intensity movement performed before the first meal of the day, is one of the most efficient ways to stimulate fat oxidation, but it must be approached with precision and understanding of how the body responds to energy demands in different metabolic states. The key to this strategy lies in how the body prioritizes fuel sources depending on the presence or absence of food, particularly carbohydrates, in the system. When you wake in the morning after an overnight fast, assuming you've slept for approximately 7 to 9 hours, your body is in a low insulin, low glycogen state. In this condition, the metabolic environment is primed to utilize stored fat as a primary fuel source, especially when the intensity of physical activity stays within the aerobic threshold. This state can be leveraged by engaging in physical movement, such as brisk walking, cycling, or zone 2 cardio, before eating. In the fasted state, insulin levels are suppressed, which is critical because insulin acts as a gatekeeper, favoring storage rather than mobilization of fat. When insulin is low, lipolysis, the breakdown of stored triglycerides into free fatty acids, increases, and these fatty acids can be oxidized by the mitochondria in muscle cells for fuel. The mitochondrial machinery is more likely to access stored fat when glucose is not readily available, as would be the case after a typical overnight fast. This is not speculation, but grounded in robust physiology and supported by numerous studies measuring respiratory exchange ratios, which reflect substrate utilization during exercise. Lower values of this ratio during fasted training indicate greater fat oxidation. However, context is everything. One crucial condition for fasted training to work effectively and safely is that the individual has had sufficient and high-quality sleep. Without adequate sleep, typically defined as a minimum of 6.5 hours per night for most individuals, cortisol, the body's primary alertness and stress hormone, tends to be chronically elevated. While a morning cortisol spike is normal and adaptive when sleep is sufficient and circadian rhythms are aligned, in a sleep-deprived state, that same cortisol increase can become maladaptive, leading to elevated blood glucose, suppressed immune function, and muscle catabolism. In this situation, fasted training can exacerbate stress on the system rather than promote efficient fat metabolism. The body interprets the combination of low fuel availability and high physical demand in a sleep-deprived state as a signal of threat or scarcity, and may downregulate metabolic efficiency as a protective mechanism. This is why sleep cannot be decoupled from any fat loss strategy that involves training in a fasted state. When sleep is consistent and circadian rhythms are aligned with light-dark cycles, fasted training becomes a powerful method to improve metabolic flexibility, the body's ability to switch efficiently between burning carbohydrates and fat depending on availability. Over time, regular fasted low-intensity training increases the capacity and number of mitochondria in skeletal muscle, improves insulin sensitivity, and enhances endurance by teaching the body to spare glycogen and rely more heavily on fat stores. It is this adaptation, rather than a single workout or acute calorie burn, that ultimately contributes to long-term fat loss and metabolic health. In terms of timing and structure, the first 60 to 90 minutes after waking is an ideal window for fasted training. During this period, core body temperature is rising, cortisol is peaking in its diurnal rhythm, and natural alertness is increasing, making it an optimal time for physical activity. This doesn't need to be intense exercise. In fact, high-intensity interval training or resistance training in a fasted state can place too much demand on muscle glycogen and may result in performance decline or unnecessary muscle breakdown unless the individual is well adapted. For the purposes of fat oxidation and hormone regulation, lower intensity work sustained for 30 to 60 minutes is far more effective and sustainable. Activities like walking at 60-70% of maximum heart rate or cycling at a steady pace keep the body in the fat-burning zone and avoid sharp cortisol spikes that come with high exertion efforts. It's also worth noting that hydration and electrolytes play an essential role during fasted training. Even mild dehydration can impair performance, stress the cardiovascular system, and reduce fat oxidation rates. Starting the day with water and a small amount of electrolytes, such as sodium, magnesium, and potassium, can support cellular function and help the body adapt to training in a fasted state more comfortably. This simple step can also improve adherence, since one of the main reasons people discontinue fasted training is early onset fatigue or lightheadedness, which are often symptoms of electrolyte imbalance rather than a lack of food. This protocol, when implemented consistently and in alignment with sleep and circadian rhythms, creates a hormonal and metabolic environment that favors fat mobilization, increases mitochondrial efficiency, and gradually retrains the body to use fat more effectively as fuel throughout the day. Not just during the training session itself, cold exposure has emerged as one of the most biologically grounded tools for enhancing fat metabolism and accelerating fat loss, not by directly burning calories in the way traditional exercise might, but by activating a specialized tissue in the body known as brown adipose tissue or B8. Unlike white fat, which primarily stores energy in the form of triglycerides, brown fat's role is to burn energy to generate heat, a process called non-shivering thermogenesis. This process is deeply rooted in human evolution and physiology. In colder climates, the body had to maintain its core temperature to survive, and brown fat evolved as a mechanism to accomplish that by oxidizing lipids and glucose in a highly metabolically active way. Brown fat is most densely located in areas such as the neck, upper back, and around the spine and kidneys. Its high mitochondrial content gives it a darker color under the microscope and makes it metabolically unique. When cold receptors in the skin detect a drop in external temperature, they send signals via the sympathetic nervous system to activate brown fat. This triggers a cascade involving norepinephrine release and mitochondrial uncoupling within brown fat cells, which results in increased heat production and fat oxidation. This is not just a theoretical mechanism. Studies using PET CT scans have shown that people exposed to cold temperatures consistently activate brown fat, leading to increased resting energy expenditure, improved insulin sensitivity, and in some cases, measurable reductions in body fat over time. For those seeking to accelerate fat loss, the key is not extreme or prolonged cold, but rather controlled and repeated exposure to mild cold stress. The goal is to trigger the adaptive response without inducing hypothermia or overstressing the system. Short bouts of cold exposure, such as cold showers, cold plunges, or immersion in cold water, can activate brown fat in a matter of minutes. The exposure does not need to be painfully uncomfortable. In fact, research indicates that even mild cold that causes slight shivering or intense cold that can be tolerated for just 1 to 5 minutes is sufficient to increase norepinephrine levels by 2 to 5-fold and initiate thermogenic activity. There is also a growing body of research showing that repeated cold exposure enhances mitochondrial biogenesis, not just in brown fat, but in skeletal muscle, contributing to better energy utilization across multiple tissues. This increase in mitochondrial density and function means that the body becomes more efficient at using fat as a fuel source, even outside of the cold exposure itself. Furthermore, the metabolic benefits of cold exposure are amplified when done consistently over time. Adaptation is a key principle. Repeated exposure increases tolerance and leads to greater thermogenic output with less discomfort. This process of hormesis, where mild stress leads to stronger physiological adaptations, is central to many interventions in health and performance optimization, and cold exposure is a prime example. It is also important to understand the hormonal and neurological side effects of cold exposure, many of which support fat loss indirectly by improving mood, focus, and motivation. When the body is exposed to cold, particularly sudden immersion in cold water, there is a sharp rise in catecholamines, dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine. These neurochemicals not only support metabolic function, but also enhance alertness and resilience to stress. Dopamine levels, in particular, can remain elevated for hours after cold exposure, contributing to improved willpower and reduced cravings for hyperpalatable high-calorie foods. This psychological shift is often overlooked in fat loss discussions, but plays a crucial role in adherence and consistency over time. If an individual feels more energized, focused, and emotionally regulated, they are far more likely to maintain the behaviors required for long-term fat loss. Shivering is another powerful but underutilized component of cold-induced fat burning. Most people attempt to avoid shivering during cold exposure, assuming it indicates that the body is under too much stress. However, brief periods of shivering actually increase caloric burn significantly and recruit muscle fibers in ways that simulate mild physical activity. During shivering, muscles undergo rapid involuntary contractions, and this neuromuscular activity draws heavily on glucose and fatty acids for energy. Moreover, research shows that shivering triggers the release of irisin, a myokine that helps convert white fat into beige fat, a tissue with thermogenic properties similar to brown fat. This conversion increases the overall fat burning potential of the body, even when it's not in a cold environment. The timing and frequency of cold exposure also matter. Early in the day, cold exposure has a strong synergistic effect with the natural morning spike in cortisol and body temperature. It reinforces circadian alignment, enhances wakefulness, and sets a neurological tone of alertness and readiness that persists for hours. This can increase spontaneous physical activity throughout the day, also known as non-exercise activity thermogenesis, an NET, which contributes significantly to total daily caloric expenditure. Cold exposure in the evening, by contrast, may interfere with the natural decline in core body temperature that facilitates sleep and is therefore less ideal for most people aiming to optimize both fat loss and recovery. When it comes to accelerating fat loss, one of the most powerful yet often underestimated strategies is optimizing the body's internal satiety signaling system through the strategic intake of protein and fiber. While calorie reduction remains the basic framework for fat loss, the quality and composition of the food consumed have a profound impact on how the brain and body regulate hunger, fullness, and subsequent energy intake. Protein and fiber influence multiple physiological pathways that control appetite, hormonal responses, and nutrient absorption, and together they create a neurochemical environment that naturally curbs overeating without relying heavily on willpower. Protein is the most satiating macronutrient, meaning it produces a greater and longer lasting sense of fullness than either carbohydrates or fats. When you consume a meal that is rich in high-quality protein, several biological processes are set into motion. First, protein stimulates the release of satiety hormones such as peptide, YYPYY, glucagon like peptide-1, GLP-1, and CHOLA-CCK. These hormones act on receptors in the hypothalamus and brainstem to signal that nutrient needs are being met, reducing the drive to continue eating. Additionally, protein dampens the release of ghrelin, the so-called hunger hormone, which is secreted primarily by the stomach when it is empty. A significant rise in protein intake leads to a suppression of ghrelin that lasts longer than it would following a meal dominated by carbohydrates or fat. Beyond hormonal effects, protein also has a higher thermic effect of food, TEF, meaning the body burns more calories digesting and metabolizing protein compared to other macronutrients. Roughly 20 to 30% of the calories from protein are used up during digestion, whereas carbohydrates and fats require significantly less energy to process. This effect contributes to a higher resting metabolic rate when protein intake is elevated consistently, especially when paired with resistance training to preserve or build lean muscle mass. Maintaining or increasing muscle mass is critical during fat loss phases, as muscle is more metabolically active tissue and supports long-term fat burning capacity. The timing and distribution of protein intake are also important. Consuming a high protein meal, typically 30 to 50 grams, at the first meal of the day can have a disproportionately strong impact on appetite regulation throughout the rest of the day. This is due in part to the overnight fasting period, during which the body is in a mild catabolic state. A high-protein first meal not only replenishes amino acids necessary for tissue repair, but also sets the tone for more stable blood sugar and insulin responses, reducing the likelihood of energy crashes or sugar cravings later in the day. Skipping breakfast or consuming a breakfast high in refined carbohydrates leads to a steep rise and fall in blood glucose, often followed by increased hunger and overeating in the afternoon and evening. Fiber complements the effects of protein by contributing to both mechanical and chemical signaling in the gut that supports satiety. Specifically, soluble fiber dissolves in water to form a gel-like substance that slows gastric emptying and digestion. This prolongs the feeling of fullness after meals and blunts the post-meal rise in blood glucose. Insoluble fiber adds bulk to food, increases the stretch on the stomach wall, and activates mechanoreceptors that communicate with the brain to signal fullness. Together, these two forms of fiber enhance the release of the same satiety-promoting hormones triggered by protein and reinforce the feedback loop between the gut and the brain. In addition to its direct effects on satiety, fiber plays a significant role in modulating the gut microbiome. The trillions of bacteria residing in the digestive tract ferment certain types of fiber, into short-chain fatty acids SCFAs, such as butyrate and propionate. These SCFAs interact with intestinal and immune cells to reduce inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity, and enhance the metabolic efficiency of fat-burning pathways. A healthier, more diverse gut microbiome has been linked to lower body fat percentages, better glucose control, and more stable energy levels, all of which indirectly support a fat loss goal. Importantly, these microbial effects are not seen with highly processed fiber supplements, but are most pronounced with whole food sources of fiber, such as cruciferous vegetables, legumes, berries, and flax seeds. It is also essential to consider the food matrix, how protein and fiber are packaged in whole foods. For example, a piece of grilled salmon contains not only high-quality protein, but also omega-3 fatty acids that support anti-inflammatory processes, while a bowl of lentils provides fiber, plant-based protein, and polyphenols that nourish the gut microbiota. The synergy of nutrients in whole foods provides signaling complexity to the body that isolated supplements or macronutrient-focused processed foods cannot replicate. When meals are constructed around whole, minimally processed sources of protein and fiber, the body receives the information it needs to self-regulate hunger, preserve lean mass, and maintain steady energy, creating a metabolic landscape that favors fat loss over time. One of the most underutilized yet highly effective strategies for accelerating fat loss involves increasing what's known as non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEN8. This refers to the energy expended for everything we do that is not sleeping, eating, or structured exercise. It includes walking, standing, fidgeting, household chores, yard work, taking the stairs, carrying groceries, and any physical movement that isn't considered deliberate training. NEN8 is a critical component of total daily energy expenditure and often represents the most variable, and in many cases, the largest modifiable portion of how many calories a person burns in a day, especially for those who are not engaging in hours of high-volume exercise. Increasing NEN8 can therefore have a substantial impact on fat loss without requiring additional stress to the nervous system or disruption to recovery processes. The physiology behind NEN8 is rooted in a basic principle of human metabolism. The body is designed to be in motion throughout the day. For most of evolutionary history, humans were rarely sedentary. Movement was a built-in part of survival, and the brain developed systems to encourage and reward this activity through mood regulation, neuromodulation, and energy balance. In modern environments where sitting is the default, and many daily tasks have been automated or outsourced, baseline levels of NEN8 have plummeted, contributing to lower caloric expenditure and metabolic dysregulation. Research has shown that individuals with higher levels of NEN8 can burn hundreds more calories per day than those with low NE8, even if their exercise routines are similar. In some cases, the difference in energy expenditure between a highly active and a very sedentary individual can reach 1,000 calories per day solely through NE8. This form of activity is particularly useful for fat loss because it does not elevate stress hormones like cortisol in the same way that intense exercise might. Instead, NEN8 creates a low-level, sustained caloric burn that can be maintained throughout the day without taxing recovery systems or leading to central nervous system fatigue. For individuals who are already following a fat loss protocol that includes dietary restriction, adding more intense exercise can backfire by increasing hunger, decreasing sleep quality, or creating hormonal imbalances. NEN8 avoids many of these pitfalls because it works with the body's natural energy systems rather than against them. One of the most accessible ways to increase NEN8 is through deliberate walking, particularly after meals. Post-meal walks of 10 to 20 minutes not only increase caloric expenditure, but also significantly improve glucose clearance from the bloodstream by enhancing insulin sensitivity and promoting glucose uptake into skeletal muscle. This reduces the likelihood that excess glucose will be stored as fat, especially visceral fat around the organs. Walking also activates lymphatic flow, reduces bloating, and enhances digestion by stimulating peristalsis. Over time, these small, seemingly insignificant walks can result in meaningful improvements in body composition, especially when compounded daily over weeks and months. Fidgeting and micro movements are another underestimated source of N8. People who tend to pace, tap their fingers or feet, or frequently change posture burn more calories than those who sit still for long periods. These behaviors are often unconscious, but can be enhanced by making the environment less conducive to prolonged sitting. Standing desks, sitting on exercise balls, walking during phone calls, or even using under-desk pedal machines can significantly boost N8 in work or home settings without requiring dedicated workout time. The cumulative effect of these changes is substantial, especially when considered over the span of a day, week, or month. One key to successfully increasing N8 is to tie movement to daily routines that are already established. For example, parking farther from store entrances, taking stairs instead of elevators, or setting timers to stand and move every 30 to 60 minutes during work hours creates consistent opportunities to move. Pairing physical activity with an existing cognitive task, such as listening to a podcast while walking or conducting meetings while standing, also reduces the perceived cost of movement and increases adherence. Over time, these movements become ingrained as part of a behavioral identity shift from someone who exercises occasionally to someone who is consistently physically active throughout the day. It is also worth noting that N8 can counteract one of the most common plateaus in fat loss, metabolic adaptation. When caloric intake is reduced over time, the body compensates by becoming more efficient, often lowering resting energy expenditure and reducing spontaneous physical activity. This is a survival mechanism to conserve energy. By proactively increasing N8, particularly during a fat loss phase, one can offset this drop in daily caloric burn and maintain momentum without having to continuously cut food intake further. This not only preserves metabolic rate, but also supports psychological well-being as movement improves mood, reduces anxiety, and increases dopamine levels, all of which contribute to better compliance and consistency. Each of these 5 strategies works independently, but when combined, they create a synergistic system that dramatically improves your fat loss outcomes. You're not relying on willpower. You're aligning behavior with biology, fun morning light to set the metabolic clock, 2 fasted movement to tap into stored fat, 3 cold exposure to elevate fat, burning thermogenesis, 4 protein and fiber to control appetite at the chemical level, 5 sleep regularity to stabilize the whole system. Remember, fat loss is not just about what you do, it's about when and how you do it. Use these tools. Be consistent, and let biology work for you, not against you. Thank you.